Hello, my name is Michael Vinsel. Today is May 3rd, 2024, and I'm reading my book, Travels with Nobody, written and illustrated by me. And this today we'll be reading chapter 8, which is titled Biwa, Trout. So I'm just going to have a sip of coffee here. Just to let you know, this is my classroom. I teach English here. This is in Nagoya, Japan. And so this is where I hold my classes. Okay, here we go. Chapter 8, Travels with Nobody. Stephen Stroh recalls America in the early 1980s. Okay, so this chapter 8, entitled Biwa Trout. One afternoon, after I had adapted to life in Japan, between classes I had taken a walk to the footbridge to look at the river. No panic anymore. No panic anymore. This had become routine for me. I would watch the fish below, big brown carp, schools of little minnows, and sometimes I would even see a snakehead fish 4 feet long hunting along the edge. The water birds were beautiful: gray herons, aosagi, white egrets, shiosagi, coots, bitterns, cormorants. Sometimes I would see a kawasemi, in English, a Eurasian kingfisher, fly by, steady and fast, an iridescent blue streak following the course of the river under the bridge. I would turn around and watch it bolt downstream into the distance. I would go to the bridge to gather my thoughts for my classes. This one afternoon, there was a man standing at the edge of the bridge, leaning on his bicycle, holding a tall boy can of beer. Drinking beer in public is not illegal in Japan. He was watching the fish too. He was short, pudgy, appeared to be in his 50s, wearing worn jeans and a black Metallica t-shirt. He walked his bicycle up to me and asked me in English where I was from. I told him New Hampshire, in the States. I asked if he knew New Hampshire. He did. He knew it was famous because of the presidential elections. He asked me what my job was. I told him I taught English. I asked him what his job was. He looked at the ground, his face wrinkled in mock embarrassment. I am tax auditor, he said, then added, I have no friends. We chuckled. I told him that I would be his friend. Yes, I would be a friend of the tax auditor. He pointed to the river and asked if I liked fishing. I told him I did, very much. He said he did too. He asked what kind of fishing I liked. I told him that in the States I had mostly done fly fishing for trout. His eyes lit up. He also liked fly fishing. He gestured to his beer and said that he was celebrating that his son had just been accepted to a good high school. Taking a bicycle ride up the river with a 6-pack of tall boys was his way of celebrating. We talked about fishing. I told him that before I had come to Japan, I had looked up what fish they had. I told him that I had made it my quest to catch a Biwa trout, a type of landlocked salmon that only lives in Lake Biwa, the biggest lake in Japan. It is about 2 hours' drive from Nagoya. He told me that he could take me. He had been fishing many times at Lake Biwa. I wrote down his name and phone number and left to go back to teach my classes. That had been in the spring, about 15 years ago now. I had told Fusako about the funny little man I had met on the bridge, the man walking his bicycle, drinking the tall boy, who'd said he could take me fishing at Lake Biwa. I wanted to give him a call. Cherry blossom season was coming up soon. Fusako and I would have a picnic beneath the cherry trees that lined the walkway beside the river. We did it every year, inviting our friends. It was a popular spot. I asked if it would be okay to invite the man. His name was Masayuki Kobayashi. He'd said to just call him Masa. We invited him to the cherry blossom picnic. He arrived perfectly on time. One of Fusako's pet peeves was tardiness. Masa had passed that test. Beer is more expensive in Japan than in the States. I had complained about that once. For me, it had been an idle complaint. I had not expected Fusako to do anything about it, but she had seen, in Vermont, Rich Sanderson's homebrewing operation. Rich was and still is a master homebrewer. I also had made beer when I had lived in the States, long before I met Fusako. So, Fusako had looked up the possibility of homebrewing in Japan. She found that it is legal to make beer in Japan, provided that it is less than 1% alcohol. She found that all the equipment and ingredients were available at Tokyu Hands, a popular department store downtown. So we bought what we needed and started making our own beer. Instead of glass bottles, we used 1-liter plastic soda bottles. They worked perfectly and were much more convenient than using glass bottles and a capper. I made pale ales using a partial mash process, where I had to boil the malt myself and be mindful of the temperature rests necessary to activate the enzymes in the malt. It was a more complicated process, but it made good beer. Fusako began making her own batches from kits. They were much easier. Since those days, many years ago, we have never been without homebrew. As for compliance with the law, we never use a hydrometer to calculate the alcohol content. We simply assume that since we bought the ingredients at a reputable store, that following the recipes must be in compliance with the law. That spring, Fusako made a batch of stout. As we had befriended several of the Irish community in Nagoya, and they would be coming to the picnic. Masa was delighted to be let in on the secret homebrew. He promised not to tell anyone, and he never did. A few weeks later, in April, Masa took me fishing at Lake Biwa. He and his friend Hiroyuki Tanaka picked me up at 4 o'clock on a Sunday morning. Hiroyuki drove. Masa and I drank beer in the van the whole way. When we arrived at the lake, the weather was windy with intermittent rain, just a few degrees above freezing. We had rain gear and boots, but the water was rough. Another of their friends met us at the lake. He had his own boat. Hiroyuki would go with him. Masa and I would rent a boat together. In Japan, a license is required to operate a motorboat. I didn't have one, so Masa would be our captain. We got everything set up and got on the water. The other boat was bigger than ours. They could handle the rough water. Masa and I had a 14-foot bass boat with a 30-horse motor. We headed out. In the protected waters of the cove from which we'd launched, we were okay. But once we got out to the open water, we found ourselves in 5-foot waves that came in quick rhythm, just a little more than a boat length from peak to peak. The boat tossed with each wave, and we were heading into them. Further out, it would certainly be worse. Masa managed the boat as well as he could, but after a few minutes, he turned to me to say that we would have to turn back. I had been hoping he would say that. The other guys plowed right through those waves. They would be fishing that day. Masa turned the boat around and was able to ride the surf back into the protected cove where we could safely wait for them to return. We tied a rope to some bushes on the shore and sat in the boat. It was calm where we were. The rain stopped. We had a clear view of the route they would have to take on their return. Masa called them on his cell phone. They wanted to stay out fishing. We were okay with that. We would wait. We had homebrew. It was a good chance to talk for the next few hours. That was my first time on Lake Biwa. The way Masa carries himself, his hunched posture and slow manner of speech, never without a beer, led me to doubt his boat handling skills. But I had observed that he did manage our retreat from the rough water well. He was conscious of the danger of broaching, the bow going into the wave ahead as you ride the surf toward shore. It can cause the boat to capsize. Avoiding it is a matter of matching the speed of the waves. He had done it well. That day, none of us caught any fish. But a few weeks later, we went again. This time it was May, a beautiful spring day. The morning was sunny, with a thin wispy fog on the water. This time it was Hiroyuki, Masa, and me in a rental boat. Hiroyuki was aft, operating the boat. Masa was in the middle, and I sat in the front, facing astern. I was in charge of the cooler. We motored out into the open water, as calm as glass. We went past an island, rocky cliffs jutting out of the water, forested on top, steep and round, like one might see in a Chinese scroll painting. As we rounded the island, a Shinto shrine with its bright orange torii gate came into view. Next to that, a Buddhist temple, the ancient structures nestled in the only flat nooks on the island, a scene of hypnotic beauty. We rigged up our lines and commenced fishing. We were trolling with spoons. Masa and Hiroyuki were using 100-gram streamlined molded lead weights that Hiroyuki had made himself. Behind the weights they had rigged rubber shock cord to metal flashers and had spoons trailing behind those. I had a simple trolling setup I had learned in New Hampshire, a heavy-duty 3-way swivel to which I had attached by snap swivel 2 55-gram weights and a 6-foot leader leading to the lure. A copper spoon. It was not a copper spoon. It was not as elegant as their rigs, but it would prove effective. We motored slowly, just fast enough to give the lures their proper action before lowering them to the depths. The trees clinging to the rocks just above the cliffs supported a massive rookery of heron, egret, and cormorant nests, which had stained the cliffs white with guano. Black cormorants stood at the rims of their nests, wings spread to take in the morning sun, looking like ancient pterodactyls. Among them, great egrets at their nests glowed golden in the morning light, while hundreds of other birds wheeled silently overhead, the torii gate of the Shinto shrine looming behind the sunlit mist, the low gurgling of the engine barely above an idle, the only sound. The sanctity of this beautiful scene precluded comment. Then Masa leaned forward to me. Under his breath, he asked, "Steve-san, did you bring homebrew?" It reminded me of the scene in the movie Papillon, where the prisoners have been assembled in the courtyard of the prison to witness an execution by guillotine. As Louis Daga stands in silent shock after the moment, the man behind him leans forward to ask, "Mr. Daga, did you get the money?" That day, we caught 14 Biwa trout, all of them big enough to keep, some over 2 feet long. I was surprised that we were allowed to keep so many fish. Masa and Hiroyuki had said that we could keep as many as we could catch. There was no limit? Biwa trout is endemic to Lake Biwa. How could an endemic species not be more carefully managed? I wondered. When we were done fishing, we took pictures of ourselves with all those big fish on a long stringer. I imagined that in 100 years, people would look at those pictures and think the same thing as I do when I look at old pictures from 100 years ago of fishermen in the lakes of northern Maine posing with great stringers of the now extirpated blueback trout. But anyway, in the ensuing years, Masa, Hiroyuki, and I had many great times fishing together on Lake Biwa. Okay, I'll just take a little break and have a sip of coffee here. Okay. The crisis is that I'm becoming less and less comfortable being Masa's friend. From the beginning, I noticed that he seemed not to know how to socialize. He speaks English fairly well, but sometimes makes odd comments or questions. At that cherry blossom picnic by the river, the first of many he had attended over the years, one of the Irish people was a 22-year-old woman who was doing a stint of teaching English abroad. She was just out of college, fresh in Japan, and didn't know any of us. When I introduced Masa to her, he asked her, "What kind of bombs is the IRA using these days?" I apologized to the woman and took Masa aside. I couldn't believe that he had asked such a silly and inappropriate question. What was he thinking? Was he being intentionally rude, or did he really not know what would be normal to say? Over the years, he has made countless other offhand comments that have startled other people, usually something anti-Chinese or anti-Korean. I have noticed that many Japanese people, especially men of Masa's generation, the generation that came of age in the so-called bubble economy, days of the 1970s and 80s, harbor disdain for Chinese and Koreans. Masa is an extreme example. Fusako noticed early on, and only reluctantly tolerated me inviting him to our parties and barbecues. I suppose I thought that associating with Fusako and my friends would improve his character. Of course, that never happened. It never does happen. On another occasion, a group of 6 or 7 of us, including Masa, had gone on a tour of the Asahi Brewery. When we got home, Fusako told me that her Chinese friend, whose 6-year-old son had come with her, had told Fusako that Masa had made rude sexual comments to her in front of the child. I later asked Masa about it, and he denied saying anything to the lady at all. Fusako has told me that other of her friends had complained about Masa. She had told me that she had told them that we would all have to tolerate Masa because his taking me fishing, she told them, had saved my life, had helped me adjust to life in Japan. Years ago, I told Fusako that I knew Masa was a weird, socially clumsy man, but, I said, I appreciated him taking me fishing at Lake Biwa and to several other places. The fishing really helped me retain something of who I had been in the States. I might have said that it saved my life. Then just 3 weeks ago, me 57 years old, we had a barbecue. I had invited Masa. The next weekend, Fusako and I had gone out for drinks with one of the ladies who'd been at the barbecue. She told Fusako that Masa had made unwanted sexual propositions to her. I asked what he had said, but she refused to repeat the words. She was a lady and didn't use such language. I later asked Masa what he'd said to her, and he again denied saying anything to the lady at all. A few years ago, I built a boat for fishing. It was a catamaran, plywood, and epoxy construction. Every day, I would bring out the table saw, the chop saw, and all the other tools and materials. I would invite Masa to come over to drink beer and help out. We would work in my driveway. There is a city bus stop right next to my driveway. Once, I was facing away from the street, away from the bus stop. I was cutting pieces on the chop saw. Masa was standing in front of me facing the street. I looked up for a split second and caught Masa leering at someone, gesturing as if to blow a kiss. I turned around to see who it was and saw that it was a lady about 30, maybe, a foreigner. She wore a headscarf. Perhaps she was from Eastern Europe. I didn't know her. I stopped the saw, stood up, and apologized to the woman. Then I confronted Masa. I was furious. "What in the hell are you doing?" I asked. I told him that kind of thing was not okay at all with me. Even more, he would destroy my school, my livelihood. Now that is my livelihood. He looked at me blankly and said he was sorry. Until that time, I had believed that I could influence Masa for the better. He was indeed racist. He hated Chinese and Koreans, but he seemed in awe of Americans. He was greatly impressed that I could figure out how to make a boat. I believed that he saw his association with me as boosting his status among his Japanese friends. I had hoped that if I could teach him that the behaviors I had confronted him about were not okay, that he would stop doing those things. Many times, Masa had begged me not to cut him off as a friend. But it was more serious than that. Masa taunting the foreign woman was akin to a foolish child taunting a gorilla in a zoo. I did not tell Fusako about that incident. Another time, Masa, Fusako's father, and I were all going to spend the afternoon at a hot spring resort near our home. They had a free bus service. The stop for that bus was up the street in front of a special education school for children with Down syndrome. While waiting for the bus, we could see inside the windows to the children, many in wheelchairs. Masa took me to the side and whispered that he thought those kids should be exterminated. I forget his exact words, but he said it. I forget his exact words, but he said it as if he'd expected me to agree, as if he thought it were something on which we would have common ground. It filled me with rage. I told him so, but did not let on to Fusako's father what Masa had said. I didn't want to ruin the day, so I kept my mouth shut. I stewed on that for a week until Fusako and our friends were having another barbecue down by the river. It was a popular thing to do on Sunday afternoons. I had invited Masa for the express purpose of letting him know that if he valued my friendship, he had to apologize and never let me hear anything like that again. When he arrived at the barbecue, I told him to follow me. We walked down the river until we were out of hearing range, and I let loose with a harangue. He apologized. Then I straightened up, and we went back to join the others. My question to myself is, what kind of man am I that I would tolerate the company of a man whose opinions and behaviors were so loathsome? It is true, I enjoyed the fishing. We never talked much while fishing. He had been friends with Hiroyuki since they were children. But Hiroyuki is as fine a gentleman as any I have met, always polite and never talks rudely. He is a dentist. The only thing he and Masa have in common is fishing. Why had I dragged Fusako through so many occasions where she had to convey convey to when she had to convey other people's complaints to me. Over the years, in the times I had rebuked him, he had always apologized and begged me please not to cut him off. So I hadn't. So here at the pond in Japan, 57 years old, working on a drawing of the night I crossed into California for the first time, just past the blue runway lights of the airstrip in Needles, California. Needles on the highway that night. The lights of Barstow in the distance. I'm thinking about a few weeks ago when I told Fusako that she wouldn't have to endure having Masa around anymore. I had finally had enough. But how to do it? He owns the motor we used for the catamaran. I still have it at my house in a storage shed with the boat. I'll have to return it to him. I suppose at the time I will let him know that I've had enough. I don't want to be passive on this, but it is something I've never had to do. I've never cut off contact with a friend. I have drifted out of contact with other people over periods of years, but never actively cut off a friendship. Anyway, for now, I want to remember back to the day I left Flagstaff, Arizona, and crossed into California when I was 20 years old. Okay, that's the end of chapter 8. Okay.